Hello and welcome back. Welcome to Landscape Photography Tips episode 9. Today I'm going to be talking about my favourite topic within photography, and that is the art of composition. It's an incredible topic to talk about. I absolutely love talking about composition, and I'm a firm believer that composition cannot be mastered. It can only be fine-tuned and improved upon. So with that in mind, I've got 5 areas that you can work on to help you improve your composition technique when you're out shooting landscape photography. First, I'm going to talk about visual flow, how to create a visual flow through your images that will allow the eye to start in a certain place, wander through the image, explore the image, and really hold the viewer's attention to keep them looking around the image and just look for more detail within that shot. So let's take a look at some image examples here that work in terms of visual flow. So this first shot, and I've created a pathway, if you like, through this image which allows the eye to get drawn in from either corner in the foreground into the center of the image and then meander through to the light coming through from the trees in the background. So I think for this image, the visual flow is there. You wander through the image and you take in different parts of the image as you wander through the scene and eventually end up with the misty light in the background. So this next image, and again, this has got a flow to it. So as we follow the hillside around, it's bending background to the valley and just allows us then to be drawn towards the light. The visual flow is there. We kind of start here on the left, meander right through the image and eventually end up at the sun. This image here is, initially you're drawn to the foreground, you're drawn to this moving wave. It allows the viewer to follow a path through the image. So we've got this converging angle, if you like, and that takes us through to the cliffs in the background and then bending around to the right where the sun is. And then when we reach the sun, we're instantly drawn to the details in the clouds, and it allows us to walk around the image. It allows us to view certain areas within the image. Here's an image that doesn't work compositionally at all. There's no visual flow in it. There's lots of distracting elements in it, and yeah, it just doesn't work compositionally. So if we have a quick look, we've got the horizon here, which is too far up in the image, if you like. It would be better if it was lower down. We've got this water here, which I was trying to use as a lead-in line to get you to be drawn towards this rock here, which is not positioned well at all. And we eventually end up at the sun, which is neither central or towards one of the third lines. So again, positioned completely in the wrong place. But what happens as well is when we kind of walk through the image, our eye is drawn back down to this lighter area here at the bottom. So it's a massive distraction, this is. It would have been much better if I'd have cropped this higher up. That would have looked a lot better. But again, the image just is unbalanced. There's no visual flow in it, and it just looks like lots of pieces all in the wrong place. So as a composition, it doesn't really work well. So when you're looking for visual flow in an image, there's many different things that you can use. You can use a tree branch as a lead-in line to take your eye into the image. There's many different things that you can use to help, anchor the foreground, lead the eye through the scene, and just make the eyes wander around and take the viewer on a visual journey through your image. Try to avoid things that block off that visual flow as well. So a boulder, for example, placed in the wrong place in a stream, which blocks the visual flow of water, that can really, distract the viewer from going further into the scene. So yeah, just watch out for distractions as well, especially if you're shooting rivers or something like that. There's something to really try and work on. Now, area number 2 that I'm continuously working on, and it's a great area to look at when you're out in the landscape shooting, and that is repeating patterns. And it's something I'm always looking for, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it when I can source 3 or 4 repeating patterns within the landscape, especially if you've got something in the foreground, midground and the background that kind of duplicate that same shape, let's say like a geometric triangle or something like that, or a curve. It can really be very, very pleasing to the eye, and picking out these details and fitting them all together in a composition can really help sell an image. So let's take a look here at some repeating patterns and how they can really help a composition overall. So take this image here, this nice misty woodland shot. We can see that, for me, the reason this image works, apart from the mist, is We've got 3 tree trunks here which follow a similar pattern, and that is the bends that they have within the trunk, and that was really appealing to me. We can see the one centrally which has got a nice bend to it, and the one to the right of it which is exactly the same. It follows exactly the same pattern, and this one in the foreground here, even though it's closer, is again following that same pattern, and I found that really appealing. So here we have a shot of the roaches in the Peak District. This is hen cloud in the background, and obviously we can clearly see that there's 3 triangular shapes within this image. We've got the foreground rock here, we've also got the leading line of the stone wall here, and you eventually end up at hen cloud in the background there. So we've got 3 triangular shapes which really help to bring this image together. I do want to revisit this image actually, because the only thing I don't really like about it is the tops of these rocky outcrops sit roughly on the horizon level, and I feel this shot would be a lot better if I could just push them above the horizon level just a little bit more. Just by moving slightly, I'll be able to create a bit more of a compelling composition. So here we are in Snowdonia. This is a recent shot of Tryfan, and obviously we've got the geometrical triangular shape of Tryfan which dominates the background there. It's essentially what the focal point of the composition is. If we can see here in a foreground interest, we've got some triangular shapes here too. We've got this triangular boulder here, and there's also another triangular boulder here. This one particularly points towards Tryfan, which really helps the composition, and this one here anchors the foreground, balances the foreground and the background elements. So again, repeating patterns that balance out the shot. I find it really rewarding actually finding different patterns within the landscape, whether that be an abstract image or a more, thought about, highly composed landscape, wider vista type shot, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I really get a lot of enjoyment about finding patterns within the landscape, and it's definitely something that I'm continuously looking for. Next up is finding complementary colours in the landscape. This is again something I'm always working on, and it's probably one of the most difficult areas that I struggle to deal with, to be honest, because when we're composing a shot we might see an amazing shot in front of us, an amazing landscape, but then there might be some conflicting colours in that landscape that really just ruin it basically. A really good tool to look at actually if you're looking to try to find complementary colours is the colour wheel. So if you look at the colour wheel, generally complementary colours sit opposite each other on the colour wheel. So when you look at the wheel, just draw a line through that wheel and you'll see colours that suit each other basically. I also think it's great to be able to find something within your image that is just several colours, maybe 2 or 3 colours. Let's take a look at a few images here and I'll explain what I mean a bit further. So this is a shot in Snowdonia. It's a very, very muted colour palette, but the tones in this image are obviously made up of yellow, green and brown. There isn't really anything within the image. So from a colour point of view, it looks very calming. There's not too busy, it's not too messy, which essentially is what I was after with this image. Obviously we've got the calm water. This image here, now obviously there's 2 different colour tones within this image. There's the blue tealy sky colour and then these warmer orangey brown colours in the foreground. They're the only colours that are really in this image, and that works well because they sit opposite in the colour wheel. So if you take a look at the colour wheel, you'll see orangey teal colours obviously sit opposite the warmer orange colours, and that's what really helps this image, even though we've got 2 very, very different colours. Again, this image, in terms of the colours, there's a few different colours in here. We've got the warmer orangey colours and the green colours, and that's it really. There's just 2 colours, and really keeping your colour palette to a minimum of a couple of different tones really helps not make it look too busy. So this is an image that doesn't work on many levels actually, but one of the main reasons it doesn't work for me is the colours. Even though green and magenta sit pretty much opposite each other on the colour wheel, we've got many different shades of green here. We've got a lot of dark bluish greens, then we've got some yellowish greens, and then some real dark colours, and then we go on to some purples and oranges in the background here, the blue sky. So for me it just looks like somebody's threw up on the image essentially. It just doesn't work in terms of the colours. Composition's not great either. We've got this big expanse of nothingness in the middle. But for me, the colour palette is not very pleasing to the eye at all, and for that reason I just don't like this image at all. So the good thing about working with colour is we can manipulate colour when we're in post-processing. So if you're out shooting and you find something that isn't necessarily pleasing to the eye, don't let that deter you from taking an image of that scene, because you can, obviously desaturate some of the colours or even change the tones in some of the colours in your post-processing. So that's definitely something to look at as well if you've taken an amazing shot but the colour palette isn't exactly how you want it to be. So next up, let's talk about balance and that balanced composition. So yeah, finding a balanced composition is particularly difficult, I think, especially when the sky is really bland. If we've got a blue sky day or just an overcast day, trying to find a balance within that composition can be very, very difficult indeed. So obviously we've got a lot going on in our foreground most of the time, midground and background, but if we've got a very, very boring sky, the image can feel very much weighted towards the bottom, if you like. So there's a few things we can do to help create some balance within the scene. So let's just take a quick look at a couple of images here and I'll show you. So this is an image in the Peak District, beautiful misty valley in the background, but as you can see, the sky is non-existent. It's not even any colour in it. And that really lets this image down. So if we had a really interesting sky, I feel this image could be a lot better balanced. So maybe for this shot, maybe it would have been better to hone in on what was really important. And for me, this central area here is really where the interest is. So I would have definitely been better to crop into this image a lot more, zoom in with my telephoto lens and really focus on this middle area here where we've got the misty valley in the background. This shot, however, again in the Peak District does work, and this was shot on a blue sky day, and eliminating the sky altogether meant that I was able to focus and compose an image just on the landscape itself, and this really simplified the image. So because I had an aerial perspective, what it meant was that I could focus in on the barn and use the trees in the valley behind to create that backdrop, a really plain and simple textured backdrop. And that works so much better, and it really hones in on what's important in the image, and that is the focal point here, which is this beautiful old stone barn and these gorgeous, I think they're oak trees catching this late autumn light. So yeah, really honing in on the subject, eliminating those areas of bland, boring sky can really help you get a more balanced composition. Now I know it can be very, very difficult to get a balanced composition, it really can, and I think focal length can play a big part in balancing out your composition. So you don't always necessarily have to shoot wide. Sometimes looking further into the image can be more beneficial. I've done a video on focal length actually. It was in one of the landscape tips series. I'll leave the link for that in the description if you want to go and check that out. It talks about different focal lengths and how they can compress the landscape, bring the background closer to your foreground subject. So yeah, that might be worth checking out if you're interested in that. So let's talk about the rules of composition for a second. Now the rules of composition are great. So we've got, for example, the rule of thirds and the golden ratio, and these are great tools that we can use to help us compose an image, but for landscape photography, it's not always advisable to stick to them. For example, you might have a lovely composed image which follows the rule of thirds, and if you've got a boulder which is pointing out of your frame in the bottom left-hand third as opposed to into the frame, then it can completely ruin your composition. So it's really, for landscape photography for me, it's more about composing the elements of the image in the correct way. Now, don't get me wrong, I think, positioning the horizon on, 2/3 up into the frame, if you can really help, make a more compelling composition, but you don't always have to stick to these rules. But what I have found very, very helpful is retrospectively applying these rules to my images to see what works and what doesn't. So let's take a few examples here. I did actually use the rule of thirds overlay on my screen on the LCD on the back of the camera when I was composing this image. And as you can see, the tree in the left-hand corner here sits within that left-hand third. And then we've got the peak, which almost sits within that right-hand third at the top there. So compositionally, I managed to position this where I wanted it to be, which really helped the composition. But to aid that, we've also got the visual flow, which we talked about earlier, in terms of the stream running up, which leads your eye up into, through the scene and up to the top there. So even though the sky is pretty boring in this shot, the flow of the image seems to work. And obviously I've used the rule of thirds here to help create that. So let's take a look at this shot of Trivan. Now, I didn't particularly set out to use any rules of composition in this image when I was composing it, apart from maybe I was trying to get the horizon around about 2/3 up from the bottom of the frame, just to kind of help keep that layer in. So we've got essentially 3 different layers. We've got the foreground, the midground and the sky. So what I was trying to concentrate on though is this rock. Now I didn't know this light was going to show up when I was composing the image. It was completely overcast when I was composing it. So what I was really concentrating on was trying to create a visual flow through the image, and I was trying to get this boulder here to point towards Trivan. And that was going to be my 2 subjects, if you like, the water and the mountain. Now, when I got back, I was playing around with some overlays, and I overlaid this onto the image and found out that the reason why the composition works so well is because it actually does follow one of the rules of composition. So we've got this grid overlay here, and as we can see, we've got essentially the subject here in this area. We've got the light source here in this area. We've got this direction of the boulder here following this line, and we've got the direction of these boulders here following this line. So we've got all of these different elements which are creating this composition. I didn't really think about it too much at the time, but using these rules of composition retrospectively can really help to teach us more about how to compose an image when we're out in the field. So we don't necessarily have to be using the golden ratio when we're out in the field to try to figure it out. But if we can look at that when we get back and learn why that composition works, that's going to help us then to pre-visualize compositions in the future and learn more and essentially teach us more when we're out in the field again shooting. So I definitely recommend revisiting your images, putting some overlays on there and finding out why they work as a composition and if they actually follow any of the rules of composition too. These are just guidelines, they're just things to work on, and composition comes from here, doesn't it? It comes from within our mind, it comes from within our soul, and it also comes from within the landscape. You can't make a composition appear out of nowhere, you've got to put this thought process in. And that kind of brings me on to a couple of other little bonus tips, if you like. One of those first is to just sit and ponder and just relax, take your time. When you're looking at something that really catches your eye, just spend some time and just sit down a little bit further back from maybe your foreground interest. Sit down and just watch, just look and observe. See if you can figure out exactly what it is that really is drawing your eye to that scene. The wide vista might not be the best shot. It might be what drew your eye to the scene in the first place. So just taking some time in to evaluate the whole scene in front of you can really help to, create a composition. And, rushing into something can leave you, quite frustrated when you get back sometimes to the computer and you're sitting there thinking, really, if I'd have just thought about this a little bit more, I would have realised that a tighter shot would have worked better than a wide. Analysing your work is the best way probably of improving your compositional techniques. So going back across all of your shots from the last few years, working out what works and what doesn't work can really help you improve your compositional technique in the future. And especially if you've got shots that perhaps didn't work perfectly, like that hang cloud one I talked about with the repeating patterns. You can then go back and revisit those shots and improve on the compositions that you liked but you didn't get 100% perfect. So guys, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to everybody that picked up my preset pack. It really does help contribute towards the running costs of this channel and does help to support the channel going forward, so I really do appreciate that. Now, it's not designed for landscape photography, more for portraits, documentary work or family shoots. But if you're interested, I'll leave the link for it in the description below. So I really do hope you got something from today's video. Lots of compositional techniques there that you can hopefully use to put towards your compositions in the future. Something to work on, something to ponder and think about. I do hope you'll join me again. So take care guys, and I'll see you soon.